What up? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we are going to be building ourselves a Chrome extension from scratch. And it's actually going to be the first video in a series of videos where we go from the very beginning all the way through to having an actual application that we could deploy and start marketing for ourselves. And so what this app is going to specifically be is we are going to build a few different pieces. Number one, it is a Chrome extension that scrapes recipes from recipe blogs. From there, we're going to show you how to configure it to store those scrape results into a database and how to query a large language model to parse out the information that we have scraped from the website into a format that actually means something to us. That is what we're going to cover in this specific video. In further videos, we're going to get into more advanced functionality, like how we can use AI for retrieval augmented generation, how we can build ourselves an iOS and Android app using React Native that allows people to interact with these recipes, and more. So that being said, let's get into it and start looking at what we've got going on. So first things first is I built this Chrome extension boilerplate code. So if you have never built a Chrome extension before, don't worry. You can build these things out purely in React. So you don't need to have any sort of special language or anything like that in order to build a Chrome extension. You can build it in pure JavaScript. You can build it pretty easily in React, and that's what we're going to go through in this video. So if we take a look at this repo that I have here, and it'll be linked in the video, it is all set up to work for you out of the box, and I have some pretty straightforward installation instructions here. The only thing that you're really going to need in order to get this thing to work is going to, one, be a Google Chrome browser, and two, Node.js installed on your computer. That's all we're going to need out of the gate to get this Chrome extension, again, downloaded and running. So first thing we're going to do on that path is we're going to create for ourselves a new directory inside of our terminal. And so we can call this thing, I'll call it Chrome demo. There we go. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go over and we're going to pull this URL that we have right here. We're going to come in and we're going to say git clone. Boom. And again, that's following this exact command right here. So next thing we need to do is we need to navigate into that repository, and then we need to run npm install. So if we go back to our terminal, we have to navigate into the repo. Okay, and then we have to run npm install. So what this is going to do is it's going to go through and it's going to install all of our packages. Okay, so all of the packages have been installed. And then down here we can see the next step is just to simply run npm run start, and it is going to go through, and boom, just like that, it is going to pop us into a new browser window here running at localhost 3000. And so while it may not seem like it, this is pretty much your Chrome extension. Okay, now the difference is when we want to get it actually loaded into Chrome for ourselves, well then yeah, we click on a thing up here. But as far as the code goes, it is right here. Like, this is the extension, okay? And so if we wanted to go look at that repository that we have, we can go and open up our code editor and look at it. All right, so I am in my Windsurf environment, and we can look at all that code we have now. And so there's going to be a few different things to look at. You have your standard stuff like your package.json. You can go in here and look at it, customize it. You're going to have your source folder, which is where all of the more dynamic JavaScript and like front-end business logic lives. And then we have our public folder, which is where that root index file that it's going to inject itself into lives. And then we have our manifest file, which is what we really need in order to make the Chrome extension actually work. And so as we can see, when we pop over here, it says your source/app.js is where you edit the extension. So if we were to come in here and look at our source app.js, it says your source app.js is where you edit the extension. And so if I wanted to come through here and actually edit this, and I made that, you know, a exclamation point instead and went back, it's immediately like hot reloaded that change. And so anything that we're doing from like a development perspective, it's just simply going to take place in here like we were doing any other type of JavaScript or whatever. And so now if we wanted to actually get this code into a Chrome extension that can kind of like pop up over here, it's pretty simple to do that. And so if we go back to our terminal, all we have to do is run the command npm run build. And what it's doing is it's going through and it's creating a production optimized build for this project. And so now if we were to go look, you can see that another folder's been created. This is the build folder, okay? So that is what that just went and created. Now what we need to do is go back to our browser and we want to go into our extensions. And then there's going to be this little toggle button in the top right-hand corner that says developer mode. You'll notice when I toggle that on and off, some different things become available or not available to me. We need to have this toggled on in order for this to actually work properly. And so what you want to do once you have this toggled on, you go to load unpacked, and then you're going to go to your computer and you're going to find that repository that we had, and you're going to click on the build folder just like this, and you're going to hit select. Could not load background script background.js. So we have like a slight bug. Let's go look at what that is. So the issue in this specific case is that I forgot to add my background.js file, which is required in my directory. But just to show you how you can use a tool like Windsurf to kind of solve these problems, we could just come in here and paste that error code in just like that. And if we give it a few seconds to go, it is going to look through our code base and see that that background.js file is actually missing. And then it's going to recommend that it create the file. And so that's what we're going to see happen here in a second. Yep, it's telling us the background.js file doesn't exist. And so it created it for us. And now if we were to go look, here we go. We can accept that change. And it's actually prompting us to just run that terminal command again to create that build folder. So if you said accept, for example, it's going to go and it's going to rebuild this folder right here. So now that that is done, we can go back and let's try to load unpacked again and pick that same file, which now we can actually see the background.js file in here. Select, boom. And now we can see right here. So if we click on details, this is the code that we just created. So if I was to come in here now and I say pin to toolbar, we'll see in the top right-hand corner where this new icon got added. And if I was to click on this, boom. So now we have a fully functional extension, which is pretty cool. Like I said earlier, if we were to go look at this on our local host, that is the exact same code that we have right here, right? It's the same thing running. It just has this little container on it, okay? So like I said, yeah, boom. That is an actual extension that is valid and is working. But obviously, we don't want to just have an extension that has this thinking man with the mustache sitting there thinking about something. We want it to actually do something, okay? And so, like we said, what we want this app to do is we want it to scrape a recipe blog, right? And so let's build out that functionality. And so the first thing that I am going to do is I'm going to go just pick out a recipe blog and open up one of those pages. All right, so we're on food.com and we got Gordon Ramsay's roast turkey with lemon recipe. So what we want to do now, again, is we want to go and start building this thing out. And so I'm going to lean into the AI for this case just to show you how you guys can use this type of system. And so a tool that I'm going to point your direction to is one that I really, really like. Right now, it's only supported, I believe, on Mac, but they have a wait list for Windows users. You don't have to use this. You're just going to see in a second why it makes it a really straightforward and a really cool thing. So what it allows you to do is you can open a folder, for example, one of your projects like this demo that we are building right here. And I can open that entire directory or that entire project inside of this. And we can see how many tokens it is going to be taking up. Okay, so this is again really cool because you can control the exact context that you're going to provide the AI. And so that's what we are going to do in a second. We're going to actually pull our entire code base and pump it into ChatGPT. But there's a few things that I want to show you before we do that. One of the things, again, that's super cool about this tool is you can store prompts and reuse those prompts over and over again. And so, for example, when we get to like building out a Python backend for this, I have a predefined set of Python rules that talk about how I want my backend file directory actually set up. So it's pretty awesome, and I can even put one in here, which I did for Chrome extensions. And so if we were to go look at this, it is basically a prompt telling it, hey, this is how we want Chrome extensions built, generally speaking. And then what we can do is we can come in here and we can give it the actual prompt. And so we could say, I'll actually just type it out and then come back in 1 second. Okay, boom. So I came through and said, attach this to my code base for a Chrome extension boilerplate. I'd like for you to build functionality that can scrape the contents of a web page. You should have some sort of UI that allows the user to see the results of the most recent scrape. And now what I can do is I can come down into here and hit copy, go over into my chat GPT, and I can just paste this entire thing in. And so again, the thing that's really cool about this, if we just look at this for a second, is it's giving the system the entire file tree, right, automatically so that it understands the structure of the application as a whole. And then it is giving all of the actual file contents, right? So every single file that was in this project is going to be listed. Now, the reason that this is super cool is because if we go back to repo prompt, it's telling us how many tokens approximately this request is. So we can see 3.27 thousand tokens. That's nothing, right? If you think in like the context of the size of a context window for like O3 mini, it is huge. I think it has a context window of like 200,000 tokens overall. And so super, super, super big. So you can give this like huge chunks of code to work with, which in later videos, when we get into building out like AI functionality and stuff like that, we can start messing around with some of that stuff. But if we go back into this, we can see it gives us a nice output here, right? So it says, hey, for the source.app.js, you need to rewrite it with this specific change, right? So we can just come through here and find where it ends. So it ends right down here. Boom, it gave us that change. We go back into our editor, paste that in, save it. We don't have this running anymore, so we got to go back and restart our little development server there. And now we have a error. Chrome is not defined, right? And so what we can do is we can just take this, go back into Windsurf and say, Chrome is not defined. It's going to go through blah, 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 and it is going to pop us out what is needed in a second. Okay, pretty fast. Said that, hey, we were missing this one file. Basically told it that this is an extension running inside of Chrome. And then boom, there we go. And so now obviously we wanted to test this thing being able to actually scrape a web page. And so what we want to do is we want to go back through. I'm going to open up a new tab here and we want to build this. So npm run build. Okay, it's going to go through. It's going to create another optimized production build. And then we can just go back to our extension that we were in. And then we can say, again, we're in that extension, which was this one right here. And then we can say, I want you to load unpacked. And it should have the same exact, yeah, it's got the same folder selected. You just hit boom. Now it's gone through and it has redone that extension. And so if we click on this now we have this button in here where we can scrape a page. And so what it's going to do is it's going to take the context of the current page that the user is on. And if I hit scrape page, boom, we can see what happened. So it is just pumping out for us the entire scraped content of that page. So we can see it went through and it pulled all of the ingredients, but it also pulled all this other stuff we don't really care about, like the nav bar and things like that. So obviously that's not optimal, but that is the type of stuff that we are going to get into fixing here in just 1 second. So the thing that I would personally like to do now, we have this scraper that can take the contents off of a web page, but I would really love now if we could build out an actual backend that can process this information. So one option that you do have if you just want to like mess around with this stuff is that you could go and build an API request that goes out like to OpenAI, for example, and just does that directly in the browser and then returns you a result. That's fine if you just want to like test things out. You can have an entirely like client side thing going on. But again, we're building this for a context where we're going to have a large scale potentially application with thousands or tens of thousands of users that are scraping recipes, storing them, and then trying to access them on other devices, right? Through an app. So that's not going to work out for us. And so we're going to go through now and we're going to actually build out a backend for this in Python, and we're going to hook it into 2 different things. One, we are going to hook it into a database provider that can store all of the stuff we're going to have. And then number 2, we are going to hook it into OpenAI to do a few different things for us. And so let us get into that process right now. So first thing that I want to actually break down for you guys is the database side of things. And so the tool that I would like for us to use in this example is a tool called Supabase. You might have heard of it before. It's getting a lot of traction. It's free to use, which is really nice, at least on like the level that we would use it in these types of projects. And it's got a lot of really cool stuff in it. So it operates as a Postgres database. So we're going to be able to store all of the stuff we're scraping in there. And then we can also store our vector embeddings. So when we get later on and we start building out like the AI components of this thing, and we're doing like retrieval augmented generation based on recipes, we will want to be able to like extract that data. And the thing that's cool here is we can store alongside our regular data the actual vector embedding and then query it, and it makes it really nice and really easy. And so again, the tool that we're going to be using is called Supabase. I'm going to show you how to go through and set up a new project. So when you log in, you'll be brought to a dashboard. Somewhere on that page, it'll say new project. Pick your organization. Give the project a name. So I would say like YouTube Chrome demo. Now you need to give your database a password, and it's really important that you save this thing because this is what is going to be used later on. I'd recommend creating something strong. I'm going to pause real quick and do this and then see you on the next screen after I click this little green button. Boom. So after you have that, you're going to be brought to a screen that looks like this. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through and it's going to be setting up your project and all of that type of stuff. And so what we want to do now that this is running is we want to actually build our backend, right? We want to build our backend. And so what we can do is we can go back to our trusty repo prompt and we can tell it, hey, repo prompt, it's time for the next stage. And so that is what we're going to do. So I'm going to come through here and I'm going to pick my Python rules like we were talking about earlier. And I'm going to pause the screen real quick and give it a set of instructions and then we'll talk about it. All right, so what I'm telling the system, attaches my project that scrapes content from a web page. I need to add 2 core functionality. Number 1, I want to be able to save the scraped data to my Supabase database. Number 2, I want to be able to connect to OpenAI and use it to parse out my scraped data. OpenAI should parse out the following from a recipe: the URL, the content, so like the full scrape, the list of ingredients, the directions for the recipe, the total time that it takes to make it, the type of cuisine that it is, and relative level of difficulty that it perceives in this. We could even say like beginner, intermediate, advanced, or pro, right? We can give it a list to actually move through. So the last thing I want to say is that I will have a .env file, which includes the Supabase credentials as well as the OpenAI API key. Okay, so then again, we can copy this and we can pop over here and let that run. Now, while that's running, if we pop into back into Supabase, we have our tables. Okay. And so the first thing that we want to do is we need to actually create the table that this thing is going to dump into. And so we can come through here and say create new table and give it a name. So this could be like scraped recipes, right? Enable row level security, leave that on. And then when we come down here, we have these columns. And so we want to tell the system what the columns are that we're going to have. And so what did we say before? So we have a URL, which is going to be a text string. We have a contents or content, right? Which would be the full scrape. We had ingredients. We had directions. What else do we have? Total time. We had cuisine type. And then the last one we had was difficulty. Or we called it, I think, technique. Difficulty. Boom. Now we can save that. And so what it's doing is it's actually creating this table so that we can store our information in it. And so I'm going to pause my screen here for a second while all this goes. All right, so that went as soon as I decided to pause. And so if we were to go back here now and look at this, looks like some of our backend stuff was created. And so let's get into actually building out this backend. And so we look at our project directory. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come through here and I'm going to just make a directory called backend. And this is where all of our backend code is going to live. We're then going to go into it and we're going to start creating some files. And so if we look in here, it's asking us to create a file main.py. What else? We'll just do these one by one just for simplicity. So for anybody that doesn't know, the command touch means create new file, basically. So if we say touch main.py, that means it's going to create main.py. So we can see that it's in there now. If we tell it to look at inside, list out the files in the directory, we see main.py. And now we need what? We need a routers, right? We need a routers folder. So if we come in here and we say make directory routers, and then we say touch routers / recipes.py, it's going to go through, it's going to create that file. Routers, for anybody, again, that does not know, is how we tell the system what to do with certain requests that come through. Okay, so if we were to send an API request to the /scrape endpoint, this is telling it how to handle that data, how to route the request is how you could think of it. Now we need to create our backend schemas, right? So we need another new directory. So we're going to do make directory schemas, and then we're going to touch schemas / recipe.py. And then we have to do the same thing down here for our services. Make directory for services, touch services / OpenAI _ service.py. Another service for Supabase. We can come through here, touch Supabase, and then a backend requirements.txt file. So we can say touch requirements.txt. Okay. So now really quick before we really do anything else, I'm going to go through and I am going to just fill out all of those files. So let us go up to the first one it gave us, which was our main.py. We're going to copy all that, pop over. Where was our main.py? Right here. Boom. We're going to paste it in. Routers. Going to paste in that router. There are faster ways you can do this type of stuff, by the way. For example, you could parse out this XML and have it automatically write those files, but that's kind of advanced. Not entirely necessary for what we're doing. So again, we are just going through and pumping some of this stuff over. Which one was this we just copied? OpenAI service. Services. OpenAI service. Boom. I actually didn't put this in the right folder. And then we have our Supabase. Supabase service. requirements.txt. Now I will tell you, because I've done this a fair amount of time, I know for a fact that some of this isn't going to work out of the gate, but I think that'll be fun for us because we'll get to see how some of these tools work. The last thing that I know we need in here is going to be our environment, where we're storing all of like our secrets and all that stuff. I'm going to pause real quick and actually paste in my Supabase like API keys and my OpenAI API keys. Okay, so I will say it's still very important that you understand what this AI actually just made for you, right? We don't want to just put stuff in here and have no clue what it's doing, because you'll get into some, you'll start encountering some problems, to be honest, with it building stuff that you didn't need and you don't know and all of that. And so what is this doing? So let's go through each of these, starting with the main.py. So we're just importing some of our files, and then we are telling it to include our router, right? So we had this router file that we created, which is telling it where does it route certain types of requests, like a post request with a certain prefix, where should it send it? This is what is telling it where to actually go, okay? So we have that. If we were to go into our services, we can see each of our services. So for example, OpenAI, we're actually importing the OpenAI library. We're then taking the API key in, and we're going to then do some information based on it. Now, I know some of this isn't going to work because it, again, these systems, and this is important for you to understand if you're going to build this stuff, these systems are built on old code, right? So it can be really good at coding, but it doesn't know necessarily what OpenAI's most recent release of something was. And so what you're going to find is that it's using like outdated docs that it was trained on. And so there's going to be a little bit of back and forth we're going to have to do to update to the most recent version. But again, I'm going to show you that stuff as we get into it. And then we're doing the same thing for Supabase, where it's taking our credentials from that environment file that we made. So it's pulling in like the Supabase URL, the API key, and so on. Now, you want to pay attention to the table name that it's using. So we can see it's using table name recipes, but I think we called it scraped recipes. So if we were to go back in here, the table name is scraped recipes. So we need to make sure that it's using the correct one. So we're going to say scraped recipes. Can save that. Okay. Schemas, this is just telling the database how, like what the structure of the data should look like. So like we mentioned earlier, we have URL, we have content, ingredients, directions, total time, cuisine type, and technique difficulty. Then if we were to go look in our router, the router's going to take the incoming request and it's going to tell it what to do based on that. Okay. So that being said, let's just try to run this thing and we can look at what happens. So we're back here with our terminal. Okay. We're in our backend directory. And so what we need to do is we need to like have the backend on, right? We need to have the backend actually running. And so that is what we are going to do. And so the first piece of that, just so that you're not like bloating your computer with stuff. Again, if you're more like intermediate or you've done this stuff before, you're going to know. But if you're more beginner and you're kind of following along and pausing and stuff, you need to create yourself a virtual environment so that we're not installing all of these packages on our entire computer. And so the way that we do that is the command python-m, so mount, and then do venv. And so what we just did is we created a virtual environment called virtual environment, basically. And now what we want to do is we want to tell it to use it. And so, boom. And now we can see that it's kind of popped into this venv thing. And so what this means is like anything that we install now is not getting installed on our entire computer. It's getting installed only in this specific directory that we have. And so if we remember, we had a few different packages that we were going to need to use, like the Supabase package and the OpenAI package and things like that. And so we want to go through and actually install them, right? Now we have that requirements file, and so we could just tell it to install directly from the requirements file. But I'm just going to actually type all of these out so that you guys can kind of see what we're doing, right? So what do we need to install? Pip install fast API, right? Which we can see on that left-hand side, UV corn. python.inv. Making sure I'm spelling things right. OpenAI and then Supabase. And so it's going through and it's downloading all of that. Okay. So now that's all downloaded. We can just come back here and run the command python main.py and we'll see if it crashes or not. And it did. So it's starting to give us now some errors. This one is saying that the Supabase URL is not being passed, basically. And so again, this is going to be most likely a situation where it's using outdated documentation. And so if you're looking at this right now and you're like, oh my God, I have no idea what I would do in this situation, you can just copy all of this, come up into your windsurf or your editor and just paste that in there. And so what it's telling us is that it's going to go basically figure this thing out. And so let's let this run and come back in 1 second. All right, so we got that loading now, and it's telling us the port that it's running on. So it's basically running on our localhost port 8000. And so what we can do now is let's go over to our little recipe over here, and then let us try to make a scrape. So we can see that it went through and it scraped the data, but it doesn't look like any of this data got posted to our backend. Okay, does not look like anything got posted to our backend. And it will notice if we go back to this code that we had, it built the backend, but it didn't actually make a post request to the backend. So now we can come in here, we can say, make it so that the front end, after scraping, posts the scrape data appropriately to the backend you just created. Keep in mind this needs to work on my local machine. And so now this is going to go out. I'll pause it real quick again just so we're not. Oh wow, this dude, the ChatGPT 303 mini is pretty fast at this stuff, to be honest. But I'll pause it just until we have a result here, and then we'll go to the next step. All right, guys. So it looks like it only gave us one update, which, I mean, obviously this is really the only file we're working with here. So we have this giant app file. Now if we were to come back in here and go to our front-end source, app.js, and paste that in. So we have that, and now we're going to need to go, again, rebuild this. So I'm going to open this new tab, and I'm going to say npm run build. It's going to run us that optimized build, and then we're going to go back into our Chrome extension, and we're going to load that build. Okay, so now if we were to go back onto this one, let's look at our Python server to see if we get the request, and then we're going to click on this, and we're going to say scrape the page. And we can see it's still not even making this request to the backend. So we need to figure out why that's happening. Oh, it's because they created a save recipe button. Haha, boom. So now we can see, boom, it went through at least. We tried to access OpenAI.chat completion, but this is no longer supported. So this is what I was saying earlier, where OpenAI, again, these models that were trained were typically trained on older stuff, right? And so it's likely the case that back in 2023, October, or whenever the training cutoff was for these models, that the documentation it was trained on was using this older version. And now we need to be using the newer version. The thing that's cool about OpenAI, though, is that they have this OpenAI migrate option that you can run, and it will do the entire migration for you. So if I was to just kill this server and say OpenAI migrate, it's now going to actually run through this for me. And it is going to make those changes. So it's going to actually analyze every single file that I have and make that change. So again, I'm going to pause real quick and let this run. Hey guys, so this thing is almost done, but as we can see, as it's getting to the actual files, like our services and things like that, it's making updates, which we can see in real time, where it's swapping out the old code for the new code, which is pretty cool. Pro tip, you probably don't want to run this. Like, I probably, going back in time, would delete the virtual environment and not have it run through my entire thing. I really just want it running through the main services that I have. But it looks like this should be done just in 1 second, and then we'll be good to go to the next stage. All right, so now we have this old scrape from over here, and if we were to come through and say save this recipe, we pop over here in a second. Okay, so we see that it is doing some different stuff. So let's look at it. So OpenAI response. So that means If we go look at our code that we have, we're sending this over and saying, hey, I need you to parse this recipe. We send it this prompt, right? It's like, oh, parse this recipe, basically. And so it returns back to us the URL, which is part of what we asked it for, right? Remember the content of the page. So it has this entire content. So this looks like it's actually making a summary instead of the actual scraped content. So that's something we could consider updating. It gives the full ingredient list and the full direction list. It looks like it's also truncating responses, which isn't great. So that's something we would want to update, that it doesn't truncate responses. And then it's telling us how long it would take, cuisine type, and the difficulty level. Then we get down to this where it starts failing. And so again, this is just a situation where we can just copy this, come over into here, and tell it to go solve our problem for us. So if we look at it though, the issue clearly has to do with Supabase, right? So it's not able to actually insert this recipe object that we have into the scraped recipes table. And so that is what we are going to try to fix here. So let's see what it recommends for us. Boom, 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 boom. So it's saying that it could be the credentials. It could be that the format isn't right. It could be that the schema isn't right, so that it's not receiving the right type of data, or it could be something else. So now that we have all of that resolved, the next question comes to this database and making sure we can actually insert records into it. And so if we go and we make our scrape, and then we want to save this recipe, we can see the result over here in a second. Okay, and so we can see it seems to be processing some of the request, but then it fails. And if we look at why, it looks like ingredients and response are not in the correct format. And so if we were just to pass this back in here, let's create a new chat, pass that in, and let this kind of solve that validation error for us. All right, so we ran that through, and if we pop over now into our database, it looks like it is working fine. So I've run this a few more times, and it seems to now be processing all of our results, which is pretty cool. So that all being said, I think I'm gonna cut the video here because I don't want it to get too long. But as far as next steps go, so let's think of like what we've done. So we went from having the boilerplate for our extension, learning how to actually develop on the extension, how to unpack it or load it into the Chrome extension, how to then build a Python backend, connect it to an OpenAI instance that's going to actually parse the data, how to store that parsed data into our database. In the next series of videos, what we're going to get into is how we can now take this data that's in the database and start making it something that would be useful for AI to work with. So that should be pretty cool. I'm excited for that video. That's all I got for this one. All of the assets and everything that we talked about in this video should be in the description. That's all I got. See you in the next video.